Hi everyone, this is Shiva. I am here with Jonathan Biss and Caroline Shaw. Jonathan is giving the world premiere of Caroline's new piano concerto this weekend at the Seattle Symphony with Ludovic Morlot. Jonathan is also playing Beethoven's third piano concerto, and it is part of a multi-year commissioning project that he is doing where he is commissioning composers to write new pieces in response to Beethoven piano concertos. Thank you all so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Of course. Jonathan, what was the inspiration behind all of this? How did you get started?
Well, I've been playing the 5 Beethoven concertos and I would say Beethoven's music in general for essentially my whole life, as long as I've been a musician or a student of music. And I was with the St. Paul Chamber Orchestra. This was probably like 7 years ago now, and it's an orchestra that I had worked with a lot, and I had done sort of projects with them. I had, usually with an orchestra you come for a week and then you leave, and then maybe you see each other again in 2 or 20 years, as the case may be. But in St. Paul, I would very often go for like 2 or 3 week chunks of time, and so usually the question came up, what would you like to do next? And so it ended up being a conversation between me and members of the orchestra, where I said, well, I would love to play the Beethoven Concerto, and I also said, on the other hand, I would also love to do something that like seriously involved new music. And then I can't remember if I was the one or if it was someone else who said, well, maybe these are the same idea, actually. And I sort of have always felt like, Beethoven is one of those artists who can't really be ignored. I think you can be a great musician, performer, or composer, and maybe you don't have that much to say about Mozart or Schumann, even though I personally love Mozart and Schumann every bit as much as Beethoven, but I can see that as a possibility. But sort of saying Beethoven, he really has nothing to do with me, just seems improbable. And so I sort of, did think that if you asked a diverse group of composers to write music that in some way, nebulous, undefined way, related to Beethoven, then the results might be interesting, and so I'm really happy to say that that's turned out to be very much the case.
Oh, well, absolutely. I think Beethoven is certainly one of those composers where you can see his influence in a lot of different music. So I think this whole idea of commissioning something directly tied to that, where you can see those connections between someone's compositions today and the pieces that Beethoven wrote before is super interesting. How did you get paired up with Caroline? Like, what drew you to Caroline's music?
Well, I had known Caroline's music. The first piece I had heard of hers was the partita that she wrote for her own group, Roomful of Teeth. And I knew your chamber music as well. I think maybe first of all because of the Brentano Quartet. I think I heard that quartet first, and then suddenly Caroline Hatley was everywhere, and I heard lots of her music. But really, from honestly the first time I heard partita, like it's one of those experiences that you don't have that often. What is this?
Right.
And it was just so kind of dazzling and strange and unlike anything I'd ever heard before that it was one of the first names that came up, and everyone was super excited that she wanted to be part of it.
When I was writing this piece, I was thinking about, I knew that you did partita, and that was your entryway.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, okay, so there's something, I brought some elements of that in a way into the piece.
Yeah, I can hear those.
A little bit. There's a hint of singing.
Yes, that's true.
Hint.
Thankfully for everyone, I'm not involved in the singing part of the piece. But.
Well, the singing makes sense because Caroline is also a violinist and a vocalist, and the piece that Jonathan is referring to, Partita, is actually the piece that won Caroline the Pulitzer Prize, and she was the youngest recipient of that prize, which is really, really a remarkable achievement. Caroline, your color palette and spectrum of the way you interpret music and the way that you orchestrate and write things it's really beautiful. It's also something that I hadn't really heard before in a lot of other composers, just the range of colors that you're able to evoke out of like many different instruments. But for the piano, did you find that there were any sort of challenges that you might have encountered with writing something for the piano specifically, as opposed to like voice or another stringed instruments?
It's certainly very different. I think actually for me one of the biggest challenges of writing this piece was was writing it very specifically for Jonathan, because he's a very particular kind of pianist and artist, and so deeply thoughtful and intellectual, and you know, the imprint of the person that you're writing for becomes part of the piece, which is also a hint of the title, Watermark. So there's like a little hint of Jonathan in the piece. I'm also not, I don't write for orchestra a lot, but I write for voices, for Roomful of Teeth, and I think about those 8 voices as a kind of orchestra. So you take the voice, you can flip it from being a clarinet into a bassoon, into a flute. And there are little hints of that in this piece that happen.
Oh, cool. How did you go about referencing Beethoven throughout this new concerto?
There are little hidden Easter eggs all over. If you listen closely, some of them are more subtle. Sort of the first thing I did was take the opening theme of the first movement of the Beethoven, which is this way, bum, bum, ba, da, dun, 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 just kind of in a raw way outlines the triad, and just softened it into this other kind of melody. But there are times in the piece where you don't know where you are, and then the Beethoven will explode out of it. And there's like 8 bars that are exactly Beethoven. So I kind of want someone to be in the hall kind of forgetting where they are, and then realize, oh, wait a second, am I listening to Beethoven or am I listening to something from 2019? And to blend those worlds as if you're kind of opening a different door that you didn't know existed. Yeah.
Would you mind to give us a little demonstration of places where?
Sure. I mean, well, the second movement, for example, which I think is so fascinating, is about sort of very, very gradually finding its way towards a fragment of the Beethoven. The 2 bars in the Beethoven are. Right, and the piano begins playing this kind of reverie of just. And then repeats it again and again with a sort of slightly different flavor, I would say, each time. And then bit by bit, like the fragment starts to take focus. Finally, it leads actually to a destination. And then finally, bit by bit, the orchestra enters with, that. And then this finally gives us the answer that comes in the Beethoven. And when Caroline and I were talking about the piece, just shortly after you finished it, I think, she said that she was trying to write the writing process. And that's one of the places, I mean, there are many places in the piece where I feel that, where you sort of, which to me is so fascinating, because I've often said this, that like as a person who doesn't write music, but is so fascinated with how music is made, I don't think I understand anything about it. Like there's so many pieces where I think, oh, that must have been the kernel, that must have been the first idea of the composer, and I look at the sketch, like there's no evidence of it whatsoever, like, nothing whatsoever. And so it's been so interesting for me to watch someone whose like life is engaged with writing music, like imagining another composer's way towards a piece. For me, it's like that's one of the aspects of it I find the most utterly fascinating.
Well, the funny thing is that you often start with the kernel, you think this is the thing, and then over time, whether it's hours or weeks when you're writing the piece, that original kernel just goes by the wayside, and it's the little sort of like residue, some kind of extra thing that you found along the way that actually becomes what it is.
It's just fascinating, really.
How was your collaborative process? I mean, after the piece was finished, how did you 2 work together, going back and forth and editing? Or
we're doing it now.
We're
doing it right now.
Because we just had the first rehearsal earlier today. The orchestra was able to rehearse just a little bit of it, so that's also probably a really different experience in that, like, you're hearing it come to life and the edits that you make.
Yeah. Well, last night Jonathan and I met and went over some things in the solo part, and for me the most important thing is just for you to know how much freedom there is, and there are, I wrote it specifically for you so that these little fragments of things, you can interpret them in slightly different ways every night or within the piece.
And it's always actually, it's fantastic to know that I have that freedom, because I always feel shy about this. I mean, especially in a case like this where there wasn't a sense, an assignment behind the piece that it was supposed to, in one way or another, relate to an existing piece of music. I feel a little bit of, I wouldn't say guilt about it, but like I feel like that's enough of a template, you know. And then I'm so. It's so important to me that the composer then get to write the piece that they want to write, not the piece that I might want them to write. You know, so I really try to keep like a lot of distance that process. It's actually a great relief to know that like once it's, you know, complete, that my playing of it actually can help the piece, I guess, evolve.
Yeah.
There was a funny moment last time in Caroline, as noticed, like literally the nicest person in the whole world, and I played something for her. She said, "Well, that's a wrong note." So, but I really like it, you know. And so I might actually play it. You know, we'll see.
Yeah. C major right there.
Yeah, exactly. I was C major instead of minor. What's the difference, really?
We're still not quite sure what the ending will be too. There's a discussion of whether or not we end. We'll figure it out.
Ludovic liked both options. I
Both
played them
options.
both for him. Yeah, so that's no help at all. Yes, yeah.
Well, luckily no one has heard it before, so
No one will know.
no one
will
will
know,
know.
exactly.
Exactly. If you could describe the piece in 3 words, what would you use, Jonathan?
A sense of discovery.
Sense of discovery.
Yeah. I talked a little bit about how they're. Sorry, did you want?
No, I'm just worried that I have to answer that question.
Oh, okay. I'll keep talking for a while so you can. There are these moments, like the one that I briefly demonstrated, where bit by bit we find our way towards the Beethoven. There's also wonderful moments in the piece which begin with the Beethoven, and then they kind of go off the rails a little bit. And so there's this sense of playing with something existing, which is really kind of magical.
Did you find that in learning this piece that then changed your perspective on how you approached Beethoven 3?
I think the answer is probably yes, but not in a way that I would be able to like put into words or codify. I think working with composers, like what Caroline was saying just now, that she wants a lot of freedom. It tells you, I think, something about how composers think and feel and imagine their music. And I think probably like now that maybe having worked with a number of composers, I know like this much about the compositional process, like versus the zero that I used to know. I think maybe it gives me a certain kind of confidence when I play, let's say, Beethoven, that you know like wherever I decide to take it, it won't be completely wrong, you know, because this fear one has, you know, it's a great responsibility, and you know, when the person's not around to yell at you, you have to kind of just hope for the best, really.
Yeah.
Caroline, what about you? The 3 words that you would use
No,
to describe
I
the piece?
should have studied before, but my ones I came up with are dream, memory, and I'm working on a 3rd one, but it's something like surprise, I guess.
Memory is really good. There's such a sense of, I think, these things living in one's back, the back of one's brain, in lots of the piece.
Yeah.
You know that sense like when you have a dream and you're like, oh, I was seeing my 2nd grade teacher in this room, but it wasn't quite the room and it wasn't quite the person. That sense of the way that memory distorts,
Right.
sort of dreams distort something. Yeah.
Beautiful. Well, I know we are really excited to hear this new piece. So please come and join us this weekend. Thank you so much, Jonathan and Caroline.
Thank you, Shiva.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.